Hey everyone! So, I was scrolling through history books the other day, and I realized something wild. We think we know Asia, right? But there are stories buried in these countries that are so bizarre, so absolutely ridiculous, that they sound like someone made them up after a particularly strange fever dream. I'm talking about a war fought over a bucket, a king who married thousands of women, an island that disappeared because someone got angry. And that's just scratching the surface. Today, I'm taking you on a journey through all of Asia, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to be texting your friends like, "Did you know that?" So, stick around because some of these facts are going to blow your mind. Let's dive in. 1. The postal system that changed everything. Okay, starting strong with Mongolia. You know, Genghis Khan, right? Conqueror, empire builder, all that. But here's what they don't teach you in school. This guy basically invented the world's first efficient postal system. I'm not kidding. It was called the Yam, and it had stations every 25 miles across the entire Mongol Empire. Riders could swap horses and keep going, delivering messages faster than anything the world had ever seen. The crazy part? This system was so good that it inspired postal services everywhere, including the Pony Express in America, centuries later. So, yeah, next time you get a package delivered, thank a Mongolian horseman from the 1200s. 2. The Buddhist statues that stood for 1,500 years. Afghanistan had these massive Buddha statues in Bamiyan, carved right into a cliff face around 500 AD. They were 180 feet tall. To put that in perspective, that's taller than the Statue of Liberty without the pedestal. These things survived Genghis Khan's invasion. They survived centuries of wars, earthquakes, everything. But here's the absurd part. For hundreds of years, local Muslims protected these Buddhist statues even though they didn't share the same faith, because they recognized their historical value. It was this beautiful example of cultural preservation that lasted until, well, modern times proved less understanding. 3. The country built on islands that don't exist. So, Bangladesh is technically made up of land that's constantly appearing and disappearing. The rivers here shift so much that entire islands called chars just pop up and vanish within years. People actually live on these temporary islands, building homes and farming, knowing full well their land might be underwater next monsoon season. There are families who've moved 7, 8 times in a generation because their island literally dissolved beneath them. Imagine telling someone, "Sorry, can't make it to dinner. My house is currently in the Bay of Bengal." 4. The country that measures happiness instead of money. Bhutan doesn't care about GDP. Nope, they invented something called gross national happiness. And they actually measure it. The government conducts surveys asking citizens about their psychological well-being, cultural preservation, and life satisfaction. And get this. They use this happiness index to ban plastic bags and free climbing of sacred mountains. In 2004, they banned tobacco completely based on happiness metrics. Can you imagine your government being like, "We checked, and this doesn't make people happy, so it's illegal now"? Wild. 5. The Sultan's car collection, worth billions. The Sultan of Brunei has an estimated 7,000 cars. 7,000? That's not a typo. We're talking about a collection that includes 600 Rolls-Royces, 450 Ferraris, and even custom cars plated in gold. At one point, he was buying so many cars that Ferrari had to create a special production line just for him. The absurd part? Most of these cars have never been driven. They're just sitting there in climate-controlled garages waiting for a joyride that'll never come. Meanwhile, I'm over here treating my 2012 Honda like it's made of crystal. 6. The temple that's bigger than a city. Angkor Wat isn't just a temple. It's the largest religious monument on Earth, covering 400 acres. When it was built in the 12th century, the Khmer Empire created a city around it with a population of nearly 1 million people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world. Here's the crazy thing. They had a hydraulic system so advanced, with reservoirs and canals, that modern engineers still study it today. This was happening while Europe was in the Middle Ages, and somehow, this massive complex was almost completely forgotten, swallowed by jungle, until French explorers stumbled on it in the 1860s. 7. The wall that took 2,000 years to build. Everyone knows about the Great Wall of China, but the absurd part is how long it actually took. Construction started in the 7th century BC and didn't officially finish until the Ming Dynasty in the 17th century AD. That's over 2,000 years of building. Different dynasties kept adding to it, extending it, rebuilding sections. Millions of workers died during construction, and some historians believe their bodies were actually buried within the wall itself. It's basically a 13,000-mile-long monument that spans more time than the entire history of Rome from founding to fall. 8. The country that didn't exist for 27 years. East Timor declared independence from Portugal in 1975, and then 9 days later, Indonesia invaded and occupied it. For 27 years, East Timor legally didn't exist as a country. Finally, in 2002, they achieved full independence, becoming the first new sovereign state of the 21st century. You know what's weird? During those decades of occupation, the international community largely ignored what was happening. When East Timor finally got independence, they had to build a nation basically from scratch, with over 70% of infrastructure destroyed. 9. The cradle of wine, and I mean really old wine. Georgia, the country, not the state, has been making wine for 8,000 years. Archaeologists found wine residue in clay pots dating back to 6,000 BC. That means Georgians were getting tipsy literally 3,000 years before the pyramids were built. They use a method called cuvevery, where wine ferments in giant clay vessels buried underground. UNESCO recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage. The truly absurd bit? There are Georgian families who have winemaking recipes passed down through 200 generations. Your great-great-great times 200 grandma's vintage. Anyone? 10. The bridge built by squirrels, according to legend. Rama's Bridge, also called Adam's Bridge, is this chain of limestone shoals between India and Sri Lanka. Hindu legend says it was built by an army of monkeys and squirrels to help Lord Rama rescue his wife. Now, here's where it gets weird. The bridge actually exists. NASA satellite images show it. Geological surveys date some of the rocks to around 7,000 years ago. Nobody can definitively explain how these shoals formed in such a straight line. Some scientists say natural sand accumulation. Others point to human construction. 11. The island that exploded and changed history. In 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted, and it was the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The explosion was so massive, you could hear it 1,200 miles away. But here's the absurd global impact. The ash it threw into the atmosphere caused what's known as the Year Without a Summer in 1816. Crops failed worldwide. It snowed in New York in June. The weather was so gloomy in Europe that Mary Shelley, stuck indoors, wrote Frankenstein. One volcano in Indonesia gave us one of the greatest horror novels ever written. Connection? Absolutely absurd. 12. The king who accidentally started a war. Over a typo. During the Qajar dynasty, Nasser al-Din Shah once sent a diplomatic letter to a neighboring country. His secretary made a typo that changed the meaning from a friendly greeting to a declaration that they owned the other country's territory. By the time they realized the mistake, tensions had escalated so much that skirmishes had already broken out. The whole thing was eventually resolved, but just think about explaining to your boss that you started an international incident because you mixed up two similar-looking Persian letters. That secretary definitely didn't get a Christmas bonus. 13. The library that held 250,000 manuscripts. Baghdad's House of Wisdom was basically the ancient world's version of Google. Between the 9th and 13th centuries, scholars from everywhere came here to study. They had somewhere between 200,000 to 400,000 manuscripts covering every subject you can imagine. Persian, Indian, and Greek texts were translated here. This is where algebra was developed, where the first accurate world map was created, where they figured out how to perform cataract surgery. Then, the Mongols invaded in 1258 and destroyed it all. Legend says they threw so many books into the Tigris River that the water ran black with ink for 6 months. The destruction of knowledge was so complete that it set scientific advancement back centuries. 14. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden in jars for 2,000 years. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd was looking for a lost goat near the Dead Sea and threw a rock into a cave. Instead of a goat, he heard pottery breaking. Inside those jars were scrolls that had been hidden for over 2,000 years, containing the oldest known copies of biblical texts. Here's the absurd part. These scrolls survived because the Dead Sea area is so dry that nothing decomposes. We're talking about documents from 200 BC, written on parchment, that you can still read today. And they were discovered by complete accident because someone lost their goat. Sometimes history literally depends on random livestock. 15. The hotel that's been running for 1,300 years. Nishiyama Onsen, Keiyunkan, is officially the world's oldest hotel, and it's been run by the same family for 52 generations. It opened in 705 AD. Think about that. When this hotel started taking guests, the Byzantine Empire was still thriving, Islam was only 73 years old, and China was in the Tang Dynasty. 52 generations of the same family have kept this business running through wars, earthquakes, tsunamis, everything. The current manager is the 52nd generation descendant of the founder. That's commitment to customer service. 16. The city carved into pink rock. Petra, Jordan's famous Rose City, was carved entirely into cliff faces over 2,000 years ago by the Nabateans. They didn't build these structures, they excavated them from solid rock. The Treasury, that iconic building from Indiana Jones, is just one of over 600 tombs and temples carved into these pink sandstone cliffs. But here's what's truly absurd. Petra had an incredibly advanced water system with dams, cisterns, and rock-carved channels that controlled flash floods and stored water in the desert. This ancient civilization had better water management than some modern cities. Then the city was abandoned and lost for centuries until a Swiss explorer rediscovered it in 1812. 17. The Cosmodrome in the middle of nowhere. Baikonur Cosmodrome, where the Russians launched their rockets, is actually in Kazakhstan. It's technically the oldest and largest space launch facility on Earth. Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, launched from here in 1961. After the Soviet Union collapsed, this super high-tech space facility ended up in a different country than the one that built it. Russia now has to rent the Cosmodrome from Kazakhstan for $115 million a year. Picture yourself building the world's most advanced space station and then having to ask your neighbor if you can use it. Oh, and it's in the middle of a desert, because why make things easy? 18. The invasion that took Iraqi tanks to a museum. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, Saddam Hussein's forces famously stole everything they could carry. We're talking about literally everything: cars, museum artifacts, hospital equipment, even the animals from the zoo. But the most absurd theft? They took the doors. Just regular doors from government buildings and houses. Iraqi soldiers apparently decided that doors were valuable loot. When Kuwait was liberated, they found random Iraqi homes with Kuwaiti government office doors installed. Like, why? What's the resale value on a stolen bureaucratic door? 19. The country that kidnaps brides, legally until recently. Kyrgyzstan had this tradition called ala kachu, or bride kidnapping, where men would literally kidnap women they wanted to marry. And it was semi-accepted culturally. A guy would grab a woman, take her to his house, and his family would pressure her to accept the marriage. Statistics showed that about half of marriages in rural areas happened this way as recently as the 2000s. The government officially outlawed it in 2013 and strengthened penalties in 2019. But enforcement is still challenging. Imagine explaining to someone from another country that, oh yeah, my grandparents met when grandpa kidnapped grandma. It was tradition. Absolutely wild. 20. The most bombed country in history. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. dropped more bombs on Laos than were dropped on Germany and Japan combined during all of World War II. Over 270 million cluster bombs were dropped on this small, neutral country. That's one plane load of bombs every 8 minutes for 9 years straight. Here's the truly absurd and tragic part. About 80 million of those bombs didn't explode. They're still there, buried in fields and forests, killing people decades later. Laos deals with more unexploded ordnance per capita than anywhere else on Earth, from a war they weren't even officially part of. 21. The cedars that built ancient empires. Lebanon's cedar trees were so valuable in ancient times that they're mentioned 77 times in the Bible. These trees built Solomon's temple, Noah's Ark, according to legend, and pretty much every major construction project in the ancient Mediterranean. The Phoenicians built their legendary ships from Lebanese cedar. Egyptians used the resin for mummification. These trees were so valuable that they caused trade wars. Here's the absurd part. Lebanon cut down so many of these trees over millennia that only a tiny fraction remains. There are maybe 17 square kilometers of old-growth cedars left. They loved their trees so much that they put one on their flag, but they also cut down 99% of them. Classic humans. 22. The tower that was taller than it was supposed to be. The Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur were designed to be 1,476 feet tall. But when they were officially measured, they came in at 1,483 feet. The architects had made a calculation error during construction. Normally, this would be a disaster, but the mistake actually made them taller than the Sears Tower in Chicago, making them the world's tallest buildings when they were completed in 1998. They got the world record by accident. 23. The country that's literally disappearing. The Maldives has an average ground level of 1.5 meters above sea level, making it the lowest lying country on Earth. With rising sea levels, the entire nation could be underwater by 2100. The government is so worried about this that, in 2008, they held a cabinet meeting underwater to raise awareness. Think about that image. Government officials in scuba gear, signing documents underwater, basically saying, "This is our future if nothing changes." In 2020, they started building a floating city designed to house 20,000 people, just in case. They're literally preparing to live on the ocean because their land is going away. 24. The temple with 4 million bricks. Ananda Temple in Bagan, Myanmar, was built in 1105 AD, and it took 4 million bricks to construct. But here's the absurd story behind it. King Kyanzetha had the temple built after 8 monks from India described a legendary cave temple to him. When construction finished, the king was so paranoid that someone might build something more beautiful that he allegedly had the architects killed. Extreme? Absolutely. Did it ensure his temple remained the most impressive in the region? Well, it's still standing over 900 years later, so make of that what you will. Dark, but effective, I guess. 25. The living goddess who retires at puberty. Nepal has a tradition called Kumari, where they select a young girl to be a living goddess. This girl, usually chosen between ages 3 and 5, lives in a temple and is worshipped as the incarnation of the goddess Taleju. She only leaves for specific festivals, and her feet can't touch the ground outside the temple. Here's where it gets weird. When she reaches puberty and menstruates for the first time, she immediately loses her divine status and has to return to normal life. Imagine being treated as a goddess your whole childhood, then suddenly at 13, everyone's like, "Okay, you're done, back to regular school." The psychological adjustment must be intense. 26. North Korea. The hotel that's been under construction for 33 years. The Ryugyong Hotel in Pyongyang started construction in 1987, with plans to be the world's tallest hotel at 1,080 feet. It's shaped like a massive pyramid and was supposed to have 3,000 rooms. The problem? They ran out of money in 1992 and construction stopped. The building just sat there, an empty concrete shell, for 16 years. They resumed construction in 2008, adding glass panels to the exterior, but the inside is still mostly empty. It's 2024 now, and this hotel has been almost finished for 33 years. At this point, It's basically become a monument to overambitious planning. You can see it from anywhere in Pyongyang, just sitting there, taunting the city with its incompleteness. 27. Oman, the frankincense that was worth more than gold. Ancient Oman was insanely wealthy because of one thing: frankincense. This resin from boswellia trees was so valuable in the ancient world that it was worth more than gold by weight. The Romans used it in temples, the Egyptians used it for embalming, and everyone wanted it. Oman controlled the frankincense trade route, and it made them ridiculously rich. Here's the absurd part. Frankincense was so precious that when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon, she brought it as a diplomatic gift, and it was considered an appropriate present for a king. Today, you can buy frankincense essential oil for like $20. Inflation works in mysterious ways. 28. Pakistan, the city, built in a perfect grid 4,500 years ago. Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan is one of the world's earliest urban settlements, built around 2500 BC. This city had a sophisticated drainage system, standardized brick sizes, and was laid out in a perfect grid pattern. They had multi-story houses, public baths, and covered drains running alongside every street. This level of urban planning wouldn't be seen again until Roman times, 2,000 years later. We have no idea what happened to the people who built it. Around 1900 BC, the city was abandoned, and the entire civilization just disappeared from history. No invasion, no natural disaster we can identify. They just left. One of history's greatest mysteries involves a drainage system. 29. Philippines, the chocolate hills that aren't made of chocolate. The Philippines has these things called the chocolate hills. Over 1,200 perfectly cone-shaped hills spread across 50 square kilometers. During the dry season, the grass turns brown, making them look like giant chocolate drops. Geologists still debate exactly how they formed. The prevailing theory is limestone weathering, but the fact that they are all the same shape and size is weird. Local legend says they were created when two giants had a fight and threw rocks at each other, then made up and left, forgetting to clean up their mess. Honestly, the giant story makes about as much sense as the geological explanation, given how uniform these things are. 30. Qatar, the country that went from pearls to skyscrapers in one generation. In the 1930s, Qatar's main industry was pearl diving. People would free dive up to 40 meters to collect pearls from oysters. It was dangerous, backbreaking work. Then in 1939, they discovered oil. Within one generation, Qatar went from one of the poorest regions in the world to having the highest GDP per capita. We're talking about a transformation that took most countries centuries happening in about 40 years. Grandparents who dove for pearls have grandchildren who are now billionaires. That's the most absurd economic jump in modern history. It's like winning the lottery, except your entire country wins at once. 31. Saudi Arabia, the empty quarter that's not actually empty. Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, is the largest continuous sand desert in the world, covering 250,000 square miles. It's so inhospitable that almost nobody lives there. Temperatures hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit, there's no water, and sand dunes reach 800 feet high. But here's the wild part. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient lakes, rivers, and settlements there. Around 6,000 years ago, this empty quarter was actually green and full of life. There were hippos. In Saudi Arabia, hippos. Climate change transformed it from a lush wetland to an uninhabitable desert. Now, oil companies are the only ones who regularly venture into it, because, of course, there's oil under all that sand. 32. Singapore, the country that's literally getting bigger. Singapore has increased its land area by 25% since independence in 1965 through land reclamation. They're literally building their country bigger by dumping sand and dirt into the ocean. They've added 135 square kilometers of new land. The absurd part? They're running out of sand. Singapore has imported so much sand from neighboring countries that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam have all banned sand exports to them. Now, Singapore is experimenting with using trash and other materials instead. Imagine your country's main limitation being that your neighbors won't sell you their sand. Sorry, can't expand the nation this year. Malaysia's still mad about the sand thing. 33. South Korea. The border where trees cause international incidents. The Korean DMZ has a village on each side, and in the 1980s, both North and South Korea got into a bizarre competition over flagpoles. South Korea erected a 100-meter flagpole with a 130-kilogram flag. North Korea responded with a 160-meter flagpole with a 270-kilogram flag, so heavy that it had to be taken down in bad weather or the pole would collapse. But here's a weirder incident. In 1976, the US and South Korea wanted to trim a tree that was blocking their view. North Korea said no. They trimmed it anyway, and North Korea sent soldiers who killed 2 US officers with axes. This escalated to the point where both sides mobilized thousands of troops, bomber planes were deployed, and everyone was on high alert for what historians now call the axe murder incident. All over a tree. 34. Sri Lanka, the rock fortress built by a paranoid king. Sigiriya is a massive rock fortress in Sri Lanka, built in the 5th century by King Kashyapa. Here's why he built it. He killed his father to become king, and his brother fled and swore revenge. Kashyapa was so paranoid about his brother coming back that he built a fortress on top of a 660-foot-tall rock in the middle of the jungle. He put gardens at the base, paintings of beautiful women on the rock face, and his palace on the summit. For 18 years, he lived on top of this rock. His brother eventually did come back with an army, and Kashyapa rode out to meet him. His own elephant turned around in battle. His army thought he was retreating, and they scattered. Rather than face his brother, Kashyapa killed himself. All that fortress building for nothing. 35. Syria, the alphabet that changed everything. The Ugaritic alphabet discovered in Syria is one of the world's first alphabets, dating to around 1400 BC. Before this, writing systems like Egyptian hieroglyphs used hundreds of symbols. This alphabet had only 30 characters. It was revolutionary. This breakthrough in human communication was discovered by complete accident in 1928 when a farmer's plow hit an ancient tomb. Inside, they found clay tablets with this alphabet. One plow, one random tomb. Changed our entire understanding of how writing evolved. Makes you wonder what else is buried out there under some random farm. 36. Tajikistan, the language that survived against all odds. Tajikistan is the only Central Asian country where the people speak a language, Tajik Persian, that's not from the Turkic language family. They're surrounded by Turkic-speaking countries. They were part of Turkic empires for centuries, and they were in the Soviet Union, which tried to suppress local languages. Yet somehow, they kept speaking Persian. The absurd part? During the Soviet era, they were forced to use Cyrillic script instead of Persian script. So modern Tajiks write their Persian language in Russian letters. It's like forcing English speakers to write English using Chinese characters. After independence, there was debate about switching back to Persian script, but by then, nobody could read it anymore. Generations of people who speak the language but can't read their own historical texts. 37. Thailand, the king who loved Western culture too much. King Mongkut of Thailand in the 1850s was obsessed with Western culture and modernization. He hired an English governess for his kids. This is where The King and I comes from, though that musical is banned in Thailand for being disrespectful. He wore Western clothes, studied Western science, and tried to modernize his country overnight. He became so interested in astronomy that he led an expedition to view a solar eclipse in 1868. He correctly predicted when and where the eclipse would occur, proving his scientific knowledge. But the expedition site was in a malaria zone, and King Mongkut and several others contracted the disease. He died from malaria weeks later. The king who tried so hard to bring science and progress to his country was killed by a mosquito while doing science. 38. Turkey, the underground city that held 20,000 people. Derinkuyu in Turkey is an underground city that goes down 18 stories, or about 280 feet underground. It had room for approximately 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food stores. There were wells, ventilation shafts, schools, wine presses, and even a church. The absurd part? Nobody knows who built it or exactly when, though estimates range from 1200 BC to 800 BC. This city was used by early Christians hiding from Roman persecution, but they didn't build it, they found it. Someone carved an entire city out of solid rock thousands of years ago, complete with rolling stone doors that could seal off sections. And we have no idea who they were or why they needed to hide that badly. It was rediscovered in 1963 when a guy was renovating his house and broke through a wall into a tunnel. 39. The gas crater that's been burning for 53 years. In 1971, Soviet geologists were drilling in Turkmenistan when they accidentally punctured an underground gas cavern. The ground collapsed, creating a 230-foot wide crater, and gas started leaking out. Worried about methane poisoning, they decided to burn it off, thinking it would take a few weeks to burn out. That was 1971. It's still burning. It's been burning for over 50 years. Locals call it the door to hell, or the gates of hell. The government has tried to put it out multiple times, but nothing works. It's become a weird tourist attraction. Imagine being the geologist who lit that fire thinking, this'll burn out in a few days, and now it's outlived your entire career and most of your life. That's one heck of a miscalculation. 40. The tunnels that won a war. The Cu Chi tunnels near Ho Chi Minh City were part of a massive underground network, over 150 miles of tunnels used during the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong lived down there, had hospitals, sleeping quarters, kitchens, everything. The tunnels were so narrow that average-sized American soldiers couldn't fit through them, so the U.S. had to create special tunnel rat units of smaller soldiers to explore them. Here's the absurd part. These tunnels were sometimes dug right under U.S. military bases. The Viet Cong would pop up, attack, and disappear back underground. At one point, they dug a tunnel into a U.S. ammo dump and stole explosives for months before anyone noticed. The Americans tried everything to destroy these tunnels: bombs, gas, specially trained dogs. Nothing worked. Eventually, they just accepted they couldn't win against an enemy who could disappear into the ground. Modern military technology versus determined people with shovels, and the shovels won. And there you have it. 40 absolutely absurd things about Asian countries that most people have never heard about. The thing that strikes me most about all these stories is how much we don't know. Every country has these layers of bizarre, fascinating, tragic, and sometimes hilarious history that never makes it into textbooks. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Asian history's weird side, smash that like button and let me know in the comments which facts surprised you the most. Was it the Mongolian postal system, the Korean flagpole war, that crater that's been burning for 53 years? Subscribe if you want more content like this, because honestly, every continent has stories this weird, and I'm just getting started. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.